Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, October 23, 1945. When Dr. Evelyn Hartwell walked into Mrs. Delia Kensington's apartment, the first thing she noticed was the smell. Not the usual mustiness of age, the faint staleness of old linens, or the odor of cabbage that clung to most elderly patients' homes on her rounds. This was the sharp tang of fresh paint, turpentine, and something else. Something indefinable and unsettling, like the air itself was holding its breath before a storm. "Mrs. Kensington, hello," Evelyn said, setting down her medical bag. "How are you feeling after all the work that's been done?" The old woman sat hunched by the window, her shoulders curved like a question mark. She was 73 years old, but today she looked 100. Her eyes roamed the freshly painted walls, the new baseboards, the gleaming linoleum. And in those eyes, Evelyn saw something more than simple fatigue. "Doctor," Mrs. Kensington whispered, her voice trembling. You haven't seen my locket, have you? The one with the picture of my husband? The one he gave me before he shipped out in 18? Evelyn felt a chill run through her. This was the 16th in a year. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, November 12, 1944, 1 year earlier. 26-year-old Dr. Evelyn Hartwell had been assigned to the Lawrenceville district as a community physician just 3 months ago. After medical school, after her residency at Allegheny General, after the engagement that fell apart when her fiancé confessed he loved someone else, someone who worked at the very same hospital, Evelyn had thrown herself into her work with desperate intensity. Her district covered 4 tenement buildings on Butler Street and 2 older row houses on Penn Avenue. 850 souls, of which 230 were elderly. On that November day, she first heard the name that would later haunt her dreams. "Mr. Vernon's such a good man," chirped 73-year-old Mrs. Edith Carmichael, gesturing toward her freshly painted ceiling. "Only charged me $15 for the whole job. Brought his own paint, his own wallpaper, even laid down this nice linoleum. Worked for 3 solid days, never wasted a minute, and so polite. Always ma'am this and ma'am that. When you bring him coffee, he thanks you like you're doing him the greatest favor." Evelyn examined her patient mechanically, checking her blood pressure, listening to complaints about joint pain. The repair work was genuinely impressive. Clean corners, professional finish. It was strange, though, that Mrs. Carmichael didn't seem happy about it. She seemed hollow. Evelyn asked, folding up her stethoscope. The old woman replied quickly. Too quickly. Evelyn's attention sharpened. "Well, I don't know for certain." Mrs. Carmichael fidgeted. "I'm probably just getting senile. You know how it is. I must have misplaced it and can't remember where. Mr. Vernon wouldn't have anything to do with it, I'm sure of that. He's such a gentleman." Evelyn didn't think much of it then. Elderly people did frequently misplace things, forgot where they'd put items. Mrs. Carmichael's medical file received a standard notation about the routine checkup, and the doctor moved on to her next patient. But 2 weeks later, it happened again. 72-year-old Mrs. Constance Brennan, 2nd building, 3rd floor. The same enthusiastic praise for the wonderful handyman, Mr. Vernon. The same $15 bargain rate for cosmetic repairs. The same fresh paint smell. And the same missing valuables. This time, a sterling silver serving spoon and 2 gold wedding bands. __quote _12 Mrs. Brennan muttered, worrying the edge of her handkerchief. December brought a 3rd case. January brought a 4th and 5th. By February, the count had passed a dozen. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, March 15, 1945. Evelyn sat in her tiny office at the community health clinic, medical files spread before her. 11 patients. Ages ranging from 70 to 83, all living alone. All had renovation work done in the last 4 months. All mentioned the same name, Garrett Vernon. And all, every single one, had lost something valuable immediately after the repairs. Gold earrings, silver cigarette cases, antique pocket watches, brooches, rings, bracelets, cash from hidden savings, war bonds. One woman lost an icon her grandmother had brought from the old country. Another lost sterling flatware that had been in her family since before the Civil War. Evelyn took a clean sheet of paper and began making a table. Name, address, date of repair, items missing. The more she wrote, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't coincidence. This was a system. But the most disturbing part wasn't that. The most disturbing part was that not one of these women had filed a police report. More than that, they all defended this Vernon, blamed themselves, their forgetfulness, their aging minds. Evelyn jumped. In the doorway stood the clinic director, Mrs. Millicent Ashford, a formidable woman in her late 50s with a face like carved granite. Evelyn answered, instinctively covering her list with her hand. ___, quote _ 16 ___. Mrs. Ashford turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply on the linoleum corridor. Evelyn watched her go, then looked back at her list. 11 patients, 11 thefts, 1 thief, and nobody wanted to believe it. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, March 28, 1945. Evelyn first saw Garrett Vernon by chance, leaving the building at 412 Butler Street. She'd just finished examining another patient, Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore, who'd also been praising a wonderful handyman who'd promised to come by next week. A man in his mid-40s was climbing the front steps, carrying a paint bucket and a roll of wallpaper. Average height, sturdy build, with a neat mustache and an open, pleasant face. Dressed simply but cleanly, blue work shirt, canvas trousers, worn boots. In his hand, a battered toolbox. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said with a friendly nod. "Good afternoon," Evelyn replied automatically, unable to look away. There he was, this man, polite, smiling, with kind eyes. It seemed impossible that he could be robbing helpless old women. Garrett Vernon passed by, whistling a tune. Evelyn followed him with her eyes, then quickly descended and positioned herself near the adjacent building. Through a first-floor window, she could see him climb to the second floor and ring Mrs. Whitmore's bell. The door opened. She heard the old woman's delighted voice. "Mr. Vernon, I've been waiting for you." Evelyn stood there for another 20 minutes, not knowing what to do. Go up and confront him? On what grounds? She had no proof, only suspicions and coincidences. Call the police? But without complaints from the victims, the police wouldn't act. And the ladies wouldn't file complaints, they defended him. She went home angry and helpless. Her studio apartment on the city's edge was cold and empty. Evelyn made herself strong tea, sat at the table and pulled out her list again. 12 now. Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore would be the 13th. Something had to be done. But what? Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, April 10, 1945. At night, Evelyn had nightmares. Endless hallways lined with jewelry boxes. Garrett Vernon walking down this hallway, opening box after box, reaching inside and pulling out rings, earrings, bracelets. And from the boxes, instead of jewels, old women's hands emerged, wrinkled, bony, with sagging skin. They grabbed at his shirt, scratched at his face, but he only laughed and kept walking, walking, walking. Evelyn would wake in a cold sweat, stare at the dark ceiling and think, "I'm going insane. I'm seeing crimes where maybe none exist." But in the morning, arriving at work, she learned that Mrs. Adelaide Whitmore had lost her deceased husband's wedding ring and a set of silver serving pieces. The repairs had finished 3 days ago. Mr. Vernon had worked neatly, politely, for a modest price. 13. Evelyn recorded the information in her private notebook and thought hard. She'd already made inquiries. Garrett Vernon, born 1900, registered address on Heron Avenue. Officially employed as a machinist at the Westinghouse plant. Good references. Married, 2 children. Wife, Mabel Vernon, born 1902, works as a seamstress at a garment factory. Children of school age. An ordinary American family. Nothing remarkable, except that a machinist's wages were about $40 a week. A seamstress made maybe $25. $65 a week for a family of 4. Not flush, but not poverty either. And Garrett Vernon charged $15 for repairs while supplying all materials himself: paint, wallpaper, linoleum. Where was the money for materials coming from? Unless the real profit wasn't from the work. The real profit was from what he took. Evelyn pulled out a pencil and began calculating. If each victim lost items worth conservatively $50 to $100, and there were now 13 victims, that was $650 to $1,300. A year's wages for a factory worker. Maybe more. But she still had no proof. Just numbers. Just suspicions. Just her own growing certainty that she was watching a crime unfold in slow motion and couldn't stop it. The more Evelyn thought about it, the more the pattern crystallized. Vernon wasn't just a thief. He was a psychologist. He understood exactly what he was doing. He targeted women who lived alone, women whose children had moved away or died in the war, women who rarely had visitors, women who were starving for human connection. And he gave them that connection. He was kind. He listened. He made them feel valued. That's why they defended him, because he'd given them something precious before taking something else away. The theft wasn't just of objects. It was a theft of trust so profound that the victims couldn't even name it. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, April 25, 1945. The war in Europe was ending. News came of Hitler's death, of Germany's collapse. The city erupted in celebration. Church bells rang. People danced in the streets. But Evelyn barely noticed. She was at the precinct station on Liberty Avenue, sitting across from Detective Walter Branson, a heavy-set man in his 50s with tired eyes. Quote 21, quote, he said, leaning back in his chair. Quote 22. Quote 23, Evelyn insisted. Quote 24. Quote 25, Branson said. Quote 26. Quote 27. Quote 28, Branson interrupted gently. Evelyn felt her frustration building. Branson stood up. He shrugged. Evelyn left the station feeling defeated. On the street, people were still celebrating. Someone had hung a banner. Victory in Europe. Confetti drifted down from office windows. But Evelyn walked through it all in a fog of anger and helplessness. She went home and called her former fiancé, Thomas Whitaker, now a lawyer in Philadelphia. It was the first time they'd spoken in a year. Evie? His voice sounded surprised. Is everything all right? I need legal advice, she said. Then, haltingly at first, then faster, she told him everything. Thomas listened in silence. When she finished, he sighed. The detective's right, I'm afraid. Without complainants, there's no case. The criminal justice system requires victims willing to press charges. But they are victims, Evelyn said. They just don't realize it yet. Then you need to make them realize it. Talk to them. Show them the pattern. If even 1 or 2 are willing to file reports, that might be enough to start something. After they hung up, Evelyn sat staring at her list. 13 names. 13 addresses. She would visit them all. She would make them understand. But first, she needed to understand Vernon better. She needed to know who she was really fighting. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, May 1st, 1945. Evelyn spent the day at the public library going through old newspapers. She was looking for any mention of Garrett Vernon, any history that might explain what he'd become. She found it in a 1938 Pittsburgh Post-Gazette article, small piece buried on page 7. Local man charged with fraud. Garrett Vernon, then 38, had been arrested for selling fake insurance policies to elderly residents. The charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence. The victims once again refused to testify. So this wasn't new. Vernon had been preying on the elderly for at least 7 years, probably longer. He'd simply refined his method, learned from his mistakes. Now, he didn't sell them anything. He gave them something: his time, his attention, his apparent kindness, and then he took from them when their guard was down. Evelyn made copies of the article and added it to her growing file. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, May 2nd, 1945. "Mrs. Carmichael, please," Evelyn said. "Just look at this list. All these women, all on my route, all had work done by Mr. Vernon, all lost valuables right after. Don't you see the pattern?" The old woman sat in her freshly renovated kitchen, shaking her head. "Doctor, I appreciate your concern, but I really think I just misplaced Mother's cameo. I've been so forgetful lately." "You're not forgetful," Evelyn said firmly. "You remember every medication I've prescribed, every dietary instruction. You remember your grandchildren's birthdays. You're sharp as a tack. This isn't about your memory. This is about theft." Mrs. Carmichael's hands trembled. Quote 45, quote 46, quote 47. Mrs. Carmichael stood up, her voice suddenly hard. Quote 48. Quote, "It was the same at Mrs. Brennan's, the same at Mrs. Whitmore's." Every single woman refused to believe she'd been robbed. They all made excuses for Vernon, blamed themselves, insisted it was their failing memory. By the end of May, Evelyn had visited all 13 victims. Not one would file a complaint. She sat in her apartment that night, staring at her list, and for the first time, she wondered if she should just give up. Maybe Branson was right. Maybe these women really had just lost things. Maybe she was seeing conspiracy where there was only coincidence. Then the phone rang. It was Mrs. Beatrice Hargrove, another patient on her route. She was sobbing. "Dr. Hartwell, I need to see you. Something terrible has happened." Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, May 29th, 1945. Mrs. Hargrove sat in Evelyn's office, her face streaked with tears. She was 70 years old, a widow who lived alone in a small apartment on Penn Avenue. Quote 50, quote, she whispered. Quote 51, quote. Quote 52, quote, Evelyn asked gently. Quote 53, quote, fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Quote 54, quote. Evelyn felt a surge of vindication mixed with sadness. Mrs. Hargrove nodded. Finally, one brave woman willing to speak up, Evelyn said. Mrs. Hargrove looked shocked. The old woman's face hardened. Then we need to warn people. We need to tell everyone. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, June 15th, 1945. Detective Branson looked at the report Mrs. Hargrove had filed, then at Evelyn's carefully documented list of cases. His expression was skeptical. Quote 63, quote, he said. Quote 64, quote. Quote 65, quote. Evelyn insisted. Quote, Branson rubbed his face. Evelyn left the station feeling angrier than ever. The system was broken. The police couldn't act without proof. The victims wouldn't provide proof because they'd been psychologically manipulated into silence. So she would have to find another way. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, June 20th, 1945. Evelyn spent her lunch hour at the public library, typing on a borrowed typewriter. She wrote carefully, choosing every word. Warning to elderly residents. A pattern of thefts has been identified in the Lawrenceville area. Victims are elderly women living alone who have recently had renovation work done by contractors offering suspiciously low prices. The method. The thief gains trust by being polite, professional, and charging far less than market rates. He works slowly, over several days, observing where valuables are kept. After the work is complete, items disappear. The thief relies on victims blaming their own forgetfulness rather than suspecting theft. Protect yourself. Always get written estimates from contractors. Check references with the Better Business Bureau. Never leave valuables accessible during renovation work. Keep a written inventory of jewelry and valuables. If something goes missing after work is done, file a police report immediately. You are not forgetful. You are not senile. If valuables disappear after a stranger has been in your home, you have likely been robbed. Trust your instincts. Report suspicious activity to the police. She made 50 copies at the library using her own money. Then she began distributing them. She slipped them under the doors of every elderly resident on her route. She posted them in the lobbies of tenement buildings. She left stacks at the community center, at churches, at the local groceries. 3 days later, Mrs. Ashford called her into the office. "Dr. Hartwell," she said coldly, "I've received several complaints. Residents are concerned that you're spreading panic. Some have even called you a troublemaker. I'm trying to protect vulnerable people. You're making serious accusations without evidence. You're creating fear in the community, and you're stepping far outside the bounds of your medical duties." Mrs. Ashford leaned forward. "I'm giving you a formal warning. Stop this campaign immediately, or I'll have no choice but to let you go. Do you understand?" Evelyn understood perfectly. She was being told to shut up and look the other way. "Yes, ma'am," she said quietly. But she had no intention of stopping. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, August 6, 1945. The atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another on Nagasaki. The world changed forever. But Evelyn was at the pharmacy on Butler Street, talking to the owner, Mr. Kowalski. "You want me to distribute your flyers?" he asked, looking at the stack she'd brought. Mr. Kowalski studied the flyer, then looked at her. Mr. Kowalski's expression was serious. "Be careful. Men who prey on the weak don't like being exposed." Evelyn left with the flyers distributed at 3 pharmacies, 2 groceries, and the post office. Over the next week, she expanded to barber shops, beauty parlors, and churches. Every public place she could think of. The response was mixed. Some people thanked her. Others accused her of fear-mongering. Mrs. Ashford called her in twice more, threatening termination. But Evelyn kept going. And then, in mid-August, something shifted. Mrs. Carmichael called. Her voice was shaking. "Dr. Hartwell? I think I was wrong. About my mother's cameo. I don't think I lost it. I think Mr. Vernon took it." "What made you change your mind?" "I found your flyer at the pharmacy. I read about the pattern, and I realized I'm not the only one. It's not just me. And if it's not just me, then maybe I'm not crazy or forgetful. Maybe I was robbed." "Will you file a report now?" A long pause. Yes, I will." Within 2 weeks, 6 more women came forward. 6 more police reports. 6 more pieces of evidence. Detective Branson called Evelyn. "All right, doctor, you've got my attention. Let's talk about building a case." Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, August 15, 1945. Japan surrendered. The war was over. The country erupted in celebration. But Evelyn was at the police station with Detective Branson, laying out the evidence. 7 official complaints now. 14 documented cases total, probably more unreported, all with the same pattern. Garrett Vernon. Low prices, exemplary work, missing valuables immediately after. "Here's the problem," Branson said. "He's smart. He doesn't take everything at once. He takes 1 or 2 items that could plausibly be misplaced. He never forces entry or leaves obvious signs of theft. And there's no way to prove he took anything because we can't search his home without a warrant. And I can't get a warrant without stronger evidence." "So, what do we do?" Evelyn asked. "We catch him in the act. We set a trap." Branson explained his plan. They needed a volunteer, an elderly woman willing to let Vernon into her home while police watched. They'd document everything: where valuables were placed, Vernon's movements, what went missing afterward. "It's risky," Branson warned. "If he suspects anything, he won't take the bait. And if we're wrong about him, we've wasted department resources and possibly slandered an innocent man." "We're not wrong," Evelyn said. "I'll find you a volunteer." Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, August 28, 1945. Mrs. Lucille Montgomery was 81 years old, sharp-minded and furious. Her sister had been one of Vernon's victims. When Evelyn approached her about helping catch the thief, she agreed immediately. Mrs. Montgomery said, quote, 99, quote. The setup was careful. Mrs. Montgomery, following Evelyn's script, approached Vernon at the Westinghouse plant where he worked. She told him her apartment desperately needed painting, that she'd heard wonderful things about his work from friends. Could he give her an estimate? Vernon, as predicted, quoted $15. Suspiciously cheap. He'd start next week. Detective Branson arranged for plainclothes officers to rent the apartment directly above Mrs. Montgomery's. They drilled small holes in the floor, installed listening devices. They photographed Mrs. Montgomery's jewelry box, documenting every item. They coached her on how to act natural, how to make Vernon comfortable. On September 4th, Garrett Vernon arrived to begin work. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, September 4th to 7th, 1945. For 3 days, police listened and watched. Vernon was everything the victims had described: polite, hardworking, professional. He chatted with Mrs. Montgomery about the weather, about her deceased husband's service in the Great War, about his own family. He drank the coffee she offered, ate the cookies she baked, and he cased her apartment with expert precision. The officers watching from above could see it, the way his eyes tracked to the dresser where Mrs. Montgomery kept her jewelry box, the way he noted when she left the room, the way he positioned his paint supplies to give himself a clear view of the bedroom. On the third day, Mrs. Montgomery went to the corner store for milk, as she did every afternoon. Vernon worked alone for exactly 12 minutes. When the officers checked their notes against the photographs later, 2 items were missing from the jewelry box: a gold locket and a jade brooch. Branson said. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, September 10th, 1945. Garrett Vernon was arrested at his home on Heron Avenue. When police searched the premises with a warrant, they found a hidden panel behind the basement water heater. Inside, a cache of jewelry, silverware, war bonds, and cash totaling over $2,000. Some items were identified by victims who'd filed reports. Others had never been reported missing. Their owners still believed they'd simply misplaced them. The arrests made the front page of the Pittsburgh Press. Local handyman arrested in elderly theft scheme. The article detailed the pattern, the victims, the investigation. It mentioned Dr. Evelyn Hartwell's role in identifying the pattern and refusing to let the matter drop. Overnight, Evelyn became simultaneously a hero and a target. Some praised her persistence, others accused her of overstepping her bounds, of conducting a witch hunt, of ruining an innocent man's life. Mrs. Ashford called her in the day after the arrest. Evelyn expected to be fired. Instead, Mrs. Ashford said, quote, 101, quote, 102, quote, 103, quote, 104. Mrs. Ashford was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed. Quote, 105, quote, 106, quote, 107. It felt like a gut punch. Quote, 108, quote, 109, Mrs. Ashford said. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, October 15th, 1945. Garrett Vernon's trial began. Evelyn attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom. She watched as victim after victim took the stand, women who'd finally found the courage to speak up. Vernon's defense was simple. He'd never stolen anything. The items found in his home had been purchased at pawn shops or garage sales. He couldn't help it if elderly, confused women misplaced their belongings and blamed him. But the prosecution had Mrs. Montgomery. They had the police testimony. They had the pattern. They had the sheer volume of complaints. By now, 23 women had come forward. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Garrett Vernon guilty on 18 counts of theft, 7 counts of fraud, and 3 counts of trespassing. He was sentenced to 12 to 20 years in the state penitentiary. As the bailiff led him away, Vernon looked directly at Evelyn. His expression was cold, empty. The kindly handyman mask had finally dropped. Evelyn looked back without flinching. She'd won. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the ending of something that should never have begun. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, November 1945. The medical board hearing took place in a somber room in downtown Pittsburgh. 3 doctors, 2 lawyers, and an administrator questioned Evelyn for 4 hours. Dr. Hartwell, did you or did you not use confidential patient information to construct your case against Mr. Vernon? I noticed a pattern among my patients. I had an ethical obligation to investigate. Your ethical obligation is to treat illness, not to play detective. When a thief targets my patients, that affects their health. The stress, the fear, the loss of trust, those are medical issues. Back and forth it went. In the end, the board issued a formal reprimand, but no suspension. They acknowledged her good intentions while criticizing her methods. Evelyn returned to her clerical work, filing papers and answering phones, but she couldn't let it go. At night, she drafted a longer version of her warning flyer, a comprehensive guide for elderly people on how to protect themselves from home repair scams. She sent copies to newspapers. Most ignored her. But the Pittsburgh Catholic, a small community paper, published it. Then the Lawrenceville Times picked it up. Then the Post-Gazette ran a feature story. Soon, letters started arriving at the clinic. Elderly people from across Pennsylvania, Ohio, even New York, writing to thank her or ask for advice or report similar schemes in their areas. Evelyn answered every letter. By hand, after work, late into the night. She advised, encouraged, supported. Her studio apartment didn't feel so empty anymore. Now it had purpose. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, March 1946. The Pennsylvania Department of Health sent an official letter. Evelyn's initiative to educate the public about elder fraud had been recognized as valuable and was recommended for statewide implementation. Mrs. Ashford read the letter aloud, her tone finally respectful. Evelyn stood silently. She'd never sought recognition or awards. She'd just done what seemed right. Mrs. Ashford said, "Evelyn managed." Evelyn nodded. But she knew something inside her had changed permanently. She couldn't just treat diseases and ignore injustices, couldn't look away from wrongdoing, couldn't stay silent. The reinstatement came with unexpected consequences. Some of Evelyn's elderly patients greeted her return with joy. Others, those who'd defended Vernon, who'd refused to believe they'd been victimized, avoided her. They couldn't face her now, couldn't acknowledge that she'd been right all along. Their pride wouldn't allow it. Mrs. Carmichael was one of them. She transferred to a different physician without explanation. Evelyn understood. Sometimes being proven right meant losing relationships. The truth had a cost. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, June 1946. Evelyn visited Garrett Vernon in prison. She didn't know why she felt compelled to go. Curiosity, maybe, or the need for closure. They sat across from each other in a sparse visitor's room. Vernon wore prison gray, looking older and thinner. His formerly kind eyes were flat, emotionless. "Why did you want to see me?" Evelyn asked. Vernon was silent for a long time. Then, "I wanted to ask, why didn't you stop? Everyone told you to drop it. The police, your boss, even the women I robbed. Everyone said forget it, mind your business. But you kept going. Why?" Evelyn met his gaze. "Because I saw their faces, the women you stole from. They didn't just lose objects, they lost faith. In people, in kindness, in justice. You didn't steal gold from them. You stole their last hope that good people still existed in the world." "I didn't mean," Vernon started. "Didn't mean to?" Evelyn leaned forward. "You did this for 8 years. 23 victims that we know of, probably more. You targeted the most vulnerable people you could find, the loneliest, the most defenseless. You were a ray of light in their difficult lives, and then you betrayed them. Vernon looked down at his hands.
I thought they wouldn't notice. They were old, forgetful.
They're not forgetful, Evelyn said sharply. They just didn't want to believe they'd been betrayed. There's a difference. She stood to leave. Wait, Vernon said. Do you hate me? Evelyn considered. No, I don't hate you. Hate is a strong emotion. You don't deserve it. I pity you. And I'm glad you can't hurt anyone else. She walked out and never looked back. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, December 1946. Evelyn spent Christmas Eve alone in her apartment. A small tree glowed in the corner. On the table, a simple dinner and a glass of wine. The radio played carols. When midnight came, she raised her glass in a private toast. To justice, to speaking up, to believing in what's right, even when no one else does. She drank and looked out the window. Snow fell through the streetlight glow. Pittsburgh slept, wrapped in winter quiet. Somewhere out there lived 23 women whose dignity she'd helped restore. 23 stories that ended with justice. It had been worth it. Epilogue. In 1947, Pennsylvania implemented a statewide elder protection program, with educational materials distributed through health clinics, social services, and community centers. Warning posters hung in hospitals, churches, and public buildings. Elderly residents were taught to be vigilant, to report suspicious activity, to not be ashamed of seeking help. The rate of home repair scams dropped significantly. Thieves could no longer operate with impunity. People knew the warning signs. Dr. Evelyn Hartwell continued working as a community physician. She treated patients but never forgot the central lesson. Sometimes healing requires more than medicine. Sometimes it requires justice. Garrett Vernon served 14 years of his sentence. Released in 1959, he returned to Pittsburgh but couldn't find steady work. Former neighbors shunned him. His wife had divorced him years earlier. His children wanted nothing to do with him. He died in 1963 of a heart attack, alone in a rented room. No one claimed his body. He was buried in an unmarked grave in a county cemetery. Evelyn continued practicing medicine through the 1950s and into the 1970s. She never married, never had children of her own. But she had her patients, her work, her purpose. Young doctors heard her stories with disbelief. Did that really happen? Did con men really operate so brazenly while police did nothing? It happened, Evelyn would answer, and it can happen again. If we stay silent, if we look away, if we decide it's not our problem. She retired in 1978 at age 60, but remained active in community work, lecturing about elder safety, consulting with social services, writing articles for medical journals about the intersection of healthcare and justice. In her retirement, Evelyn became something of a local legend. Universities invited her to speak. Medical schools used her case as an example of physician advocacy. She appeared on local television programs warning new generations about scams targeting the elderly. But she never forgot the women who'd started it all. Every year on the anniversary of Vernon's arrest, she visited Mrs. Beatrice Hargrove, bringing flowers and spending the afternoon in conversation. It became a ritual, a remembrance of the moment when one woman's courage had changed everything. Evelyn died peacefully in her sleep in 1981, at age 63. Her funeral was well attended. Colleagues, former patients, friends. Among them, several very elderly women who came to say goodbye to the doctor who'd given them back their faith in justice. One of them, a woman named Beatrice Hargrove, now 106 years old and leaning heavily on her great-granddaughter's arm, asked that a small jade brooch be placed on the casket. Quote, 136. Quote, the great-granddaughter said quietly. Quote, 137. Quote, The brooch remained on the casket as it was lowered into the earth. Green jade, carved with flowers, worn smooth from decades of being held. A symbol of faith restored, a symbol of justice served, a symbol that one person, refusing to be silenced, can change the world. Years later, in 2005, the Pennsylvania Medical Association established the Evelyn Hartwell Award for Physician Advocacy, given annually to doctors who go beyond clinical care to protect vulnerable populations. The first recipient was a young doctor in Philadelphia who'd exposed a Medicare fraud scheme targeting nursing homes. In her acceptance speech, she said, "Dr. Hartwell taught us that silence in the face of injustice is complicity. She showed us that being a healer sometimes means being a fighter. I hope to honor her legacy by never looking away when my patients are in danger." And in a small museum in Lawrenceville, there's a permanent exhibit about the Vernon case. It displays the original warning flyers Evelyn distributed, newspaper clippings from the trial, and photographs of the 23 women who finally found the courage to speak up. At the center of the exhibit, in a glass case, sits a jade brooch, green, carved with flowers, worn smooth. A reminder that justice, once denied, can still be claimed. That patterns, once noticed, can't be unseen. That one voice, refusing to be quiet, can echo through generations.